Hello and welcome to this video where we're going to be looking at the Imphenzia PixPal palette texture and material in Unreal Engine 5.5.1, and it will also work in later versions of the Unreal Engine. And you can go to imphenzia.com and click on Assets and download the zip file where the Imphenzia PixPal palette texture is, because it includes a sample project that you can use with the materials already set up. It's an Unreal Engine 5 project, so if you unzip it, go into the Game Engines folder, Unreal Engine folder, and unzip it and bring it into your Unreal Engine version. And I've loaded it up in my Unreal Engine here, so you're greeted with this little sample scene, but the most important things here is that in the content browser, under Content Imphenzia PixPal, you got Materials, and this is the single material, Imphenzia PixPal, and it's powered by these three textures, the Attributes, the Base Color, and the Emission textures. Really low resolution textures, 128 by 128 pixels, all three of these, and it's grabbing all these colors, and instead of UV unwrapping objects and texture painting, which is a slow and tedious process, then you can just lay out your UVs on top of these different colors, and this is the result that you get. So in the sample scene, everything that you see here is using the same material, and it's just pumping a lot of colors out to the characters, onto even these lit up areas here with the Imphenzia PixPal neon texture, all the furniture over here. So everything is just using one single material. A huge benefit of this method is that the content creation speed is intense. If you looked at the Blender video that I created before how to use the Imphenzia PixPal palette texture to create your assets, you can really pump out assets that are looking very stylized and similar to one another in a very rapid pace. And inside of a game engine, you get really great performance because there's not a lot of texture reads from such a small texture. And you also get a really small game distributable because there are not tens or hundreds or even thousands of megabytes of textures in there. It's just a few kilobytes. And I'm going to zoom in here in this little corner so we can see what's going on, because powering everything is this, I've got a quad here on the wall that's just pasted the whole texture onto the wall. And we can see there are a few different regions. We've got standard colors up here in the left, right, with different saturations and brightness values. We've got a glow section, which is creating these nice emissive colors. We've got some different shortcuts to create the colors for trees, wood, rock, bush, and ice. And then we've got some metallic sections for dull metal, so it's not very reflective, normal metal, and shiny metal. And we've got plastic surfaces, mirror surfaces, and we've got this little scrolling animated section that's creating stuff like this flickering neon effect and the animated colors down here on our computer. We can see like RGB lights, and that's powered by this little section here. And if we look around our demo scene here a little bit closer, we can zoom in maybe on this toaster. So I'm going to move my viewport down here. We can see we've got this metallic toaster here, and it's because it's using the UVs are laid out on top of this section here where it's got metal, and that's creating this nice effect. We've got a mirror effect here. And Unreal Engine, out of all game engines, is the absolute best when it comes to reflective surfaces. In other game engines like Unity and Godot, you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get reflection working, and it doesn't look anywhere near as good as this. This is proper nice reflection through the mirrors and all the metallic surfaces. So hands down, Unreal Engine is whooping the other game engines when it comes to reflective surfaces. There's no competition. Super, super good at that. Also, the lighting, I'd say, in Unreal Engine is by far superior to any of the others. Even for low poly environments like this, then you get a really nice effect with the way the emission is working. Lumen is doing a beautiful job to light up the emissive surfaces. And I've added a few extra lights in this and also in the other game engine projects. So I'm getting a few lights here to create an additional effect. And there's an area light here to create a nice effect on the car. So there are a few additional lights here too. We've got this plastic bottle that's creating a nice effect that's using smooth shading instead. And we've got different objects over here. We've got the TVs and the reflective car. With some of the items have smooth shading, like part of this car. It's still low poly, but it's smooth shaded. And a lot of the other ones are flat shaded. If I press play, we can see that we're going into animation mode, and I can still hold the right mouse button and navigate using the WASD keys. And this is just a demo asset with a little nurse here jumping up and down, so you can see that it's animated. And the nice thing with Unreal Engine is that even in edit mode, it just animates this palette anyway, so that's just a bit of a bonus, I suppose. And the purpose of this video now is to show you how it works behind the scenes with this material and the textures. The first thing I need to mention is that it's very important that you have the correct import settings for these textures. If I double click on this base color texture as an example, there are a few settings that you must get right, especially if you import it yourself, because in my sample project, I've already configured this for you. But if we look on the import settings here, one important thing is that compression setting needs to be set to user interface 2D. Super strange, I suppose. In other game engines, it's like in Unity, it just says no compression, so that's pretty straightforward. But I guess in the Unreal Engine, most of the stuff that's uncompressed are user interface items, so that's the only one that there's no other one that's just called uncompressed here. Normally it's compressed using some form of compression. You do not want compression on these textures because it will significantly alter the colors. If I change this one to like a default compression, and I press and I just save it up here and I go back here, you can see that we've got all the colors are totally broken, especially the wall colors here, but even on the furniture here, the fridge, the freezer, the car is not the correct blue. And it's because the compression is lossy. And on a small texture like this, where every pixel matters, you cannot have compression enabled. So if I go back into the texture, make sure that the compression setting is not default. It needs to be user interface 2D. Even if it sounds super strange and stupid, because it's not a user interface texture. Right, the next setting that's super important is that the filtering down here under texture needs to be set to nearest. So it should not be bilinear, it shouldn't be trilinear, it should not be default, it should be nearest. Nearest neighbor, that is. In other game engines, like it's called point in Unity, and it could be called closest or something, but nearest neighbor, so nearest is the filtering. If you have bilinear, it will interpolate the colors. And if I can switch this one to bilinear, and let's save this one and move into this texture, we can move over here. We can see that this suddenly got blurry. And that means that if you place your UVs slightly on the side or something, especially close to a black edge here or a dark edge, then it's going to interpolate towards black. So the colors may or may not be correct. You don't see as big of a difference here, but for all three textures here, it's important that the filtering is set to nearest. Right, the next setting that's important is the MIP mapping. So if we scroll up to the top here, we need to MIP map gen settings to be no MIP maps. What a MIP map is, if you don't know, it's basically the game engine. If you get further away, the further away you get, the game engine will swap out the texture for smaller versions of it. It'll compress it smaller and smaller and smaller, because for something like a brick wall or a concrete wall or something, then those pixels are not going to be mattering. But since we're picking individual colors specifically from this little already tiny texture, we do not want it to be shrunken and compressed or changed in any way. That's why it's important that for all three textures, MIP gen settings must be set to no MIP maps to get the best result. And the final setting we need to worry about is the wrapping. So the X and Y tiling method, especially the Y tiling, needs to be set to wrap. Because if it's clamped like this, and I press save, and I think I should demo this actually, especially on the emission texture. I'm going to clamp the y-axis and press save. And when I press play now, we can see that the animation is not working properly. It's scrolled at once, but as time gets beyond 1, then it's not wrapping. So as the time gets beyond 1, it's clamped the values of the Y value of our UV mapping, so it's not able to animate that anymore. So make sure for the textures, if I double click here, we want to make sure that the wrap mode, especially on the y-axis, is set to wrap. And I need to change this back for our base color to wrap. So those texture settings are very important. Regardless of what game engine you're using, you need to find the equivalent of those settings and make sure that they're doing that. Otherwise, you're not going to get the right colors and you might have other side effects. First, I'm going to show you the included material, the Imphenzia PixPal Material here, how it works. If I double click in and go into the material graph, we can see that there are a few. I've tried to arrange it and tidy it up as much as possible and group them. And the most important thing is here at the top, we've got the base colors that we're going to be using. I'm going to hold the Alt key and click on these to disconnect these for now. So we can see we just got this texture now plugged into base color. If I save this one and go back, we can see that a lot of the stuff is still working. We're getting the colors, but a few things are not working. We're not getting the metallic effect here on the toaster. We're not getting the mirror effect. We're not getting the animated effect, and we're not getting the glow effects from our lights. And on this one, we can see all it does is that it takes the base colors and plugs that out. So you get pretty far with if you just need solid colored objects like this without the reflective surfaces and things, then this is a good way to do it. But we want to go back in here. The second most important, I suppose, is if we want the emission to work, is I'm going to plug this emission node back into emission, and I'm going to disconnect this one for now. So now we've only got the emission texture and the base colors texture. I'm going to save this one and go back into our viewport. Now we can see that emission is working. So It's taking this second emissive texture, wherever there's black in this texture. So any part here where it's black, it's not using emission here, but anywhere in the region where there are colors in the emission texture, it's going to take those and blow those up a little bit, so you get some nice glowing effects on those. So let's have a look at the attributes texture, and this one, the red channel of this texture is plugged into metallic. So anything that's red in this texture here is going to be controlling the metallic value. The next one is the green channel of the attributes texture, and that's controlling the roughness. And like in Blender, it's called roughness and not smoothness. So we're going to take the green channel, do 1 minus the value of the green channel, and plug that into roughness. And that means that the higher the value of the green channel, the rougher it will be. And the lower the value is, the smoother it will be. So if I save this one and go back into our scene view here and have a look what's going on, now we can see that the metallic surfaces and the mirrors are also working. The toaster's got a nice reflection, the mirror is reflecting the environment, got the kettle handle is reflecting, different appliances here, the tap in the kitchen sink, the car is having a nice reflection. So that's how we bring our reflections back. So let's go back into the material. And now finally, let's have a look at the animated colors region here. So I need to make sure that I plug this one back into our, so we don't miss this one. I'm going to plug this one into the UVs of the emission and this one into the UVs of our colors. So we have a look. We've got, first we're grabbing the texture coordinates of the objects and we're breaking out 2 float components from this because it's a 2 values. It's a red and a green channel. We're breaking that out. The red channel, which is the x-axis, stays exactly the same. So we make a float again over here. But the green channel we want to do something with. So we want to take something away from the green channel and we're taking a time value and we're multiplying that by the blue channel of the attributes texture. And then we're subtracting the y value here or the green value using that time value and then plugging it back into the float. And then we're feeding these UV coordinates into the emission and our base color textures. And this is what's making it animate. So the important thing with the multiply node here is super important because when we look at the blue channel over here in our texture, then we can see that the only part of the texture that's got a blue channel is this section here on the right. And if I rotate the preview here, we can see that wherever there is blue, the value is 1 of the blue channel, and wherever it's not blue or anything else here, it's 0. So if you multiply something with 0, it's going to be 0. So the time multiplied by 0 is 0, so it's not going to be animating that region. Where blue is 1, the value, we're getting the blue value out here. So wherever we've placed the UVs on top of this right section, then it's going to be feeding this one into here. So if you want to change the speed of this, you can also do that by multiplying it by something else first. We can take this one and do a multiply node. And then let's multiply it by 0.2 instead and feed this one into multiply here. And now we can see that they're animating slower. So if you want to control the speed, you can expose a variable to do that. And but by default, I'm just going to keep it to like the standard speed. But that's one way to do it. And the magic comes then when we're taking these coordinates and feeding them into the UVs here to where we read the base colors from and the emission texture. If you're wondering why it says bad size right here, it doesn't mean that any of the objects here are bad size. It's because the pawn that I've created or the player start, I've disabled collision. So when you press play here, and I don't really want it to get blocked by any furniture. So I've disabled collision so it thinks that it's overlapped or that something's broken. So you don't have to worry about that, just so I can go around the scene and don't get obstructed by any of the furniture. Now we're going to be recreating the material manually so you really can get an understanding for how it works. It could be especially useful if you want to modify this to suit your own needs in the future. So if you're interested, then stick along and try this out. I'm just going to right click here and create a new material, and let's call it Imphenzia PixPal Recreated. And this is just going to be a normal gray texture, so I want to assign this to all my objects. So I'm going to go to my showcase folder here. This is where I imported all the static meshes. I'm going to bulk select most of these, a whole bunch of them to there, and let's grab a few of these too. There we go. And you would have expected that you can multi-change materials on these. In any other game engine, like Unity and Godot, you can just basically multi-select and drag a material onto it in the inspector, and that's it, you've changed it. But that's not possible in Unreal Engine, and it baffles me, it blows my mind. I'm super like everyone's asking for it, and they haven't done it. And I think in a big game studio, it's not a problem, because you do ultra realistic assets probably, and you sit and create something like a tree for like 3 days, and you need to assign the material once. But for someone like me, a content or an asset creator that creates thousands of little pieces of furniture or characters, then it's not feasible to do that manually. Each object you'd have to go in and change it. And you probably say now, hey, what about the property matrix? You could do it through there. But if I right click on these and I go into asset actions and I go into the edit selection in property matrix, this is where you can bulk change things like compression and things, but there's nothing here to change the material. So I don't know why. It's so strange and stupid, and it's so needed for someone like me. There's a third-party plugin that I found once that's free, but I can't remember, UV Toolbox or something I think it was called, that worked, but it was trailing sometimes in Unreal Engine versions, so that didn't really work either for me. You can bulk change it in a scene, but not in this asset collection here. So, but luckily enough, when I was looking at the internet again, there is actually a little editor blueprint. So if I right click on this one and go scripted asset actions, replace materials, I can change the material here, and I'm just going to search for the PixPal, and we'll pick the recreated one here and click OK. And well, I didn't select all of it, and it doesn't support actually skeletal meshes here, but everything else here just got reassigned with a new material. And thank you to the person. I'm going to put credits to you in the description here, because I'm really thankful for this little asset utility. Basically, it's a blueprint that you can copy and paste from a URL that loops through all the selected static meshes and assigns a new material to it. It doesn't do skeletal meshes, so I'll have to modify this a little bit to my need when I understand a little bit better. But thank you again, this is so great. So without this blueprint, you wouldn't really get that feature where I right-clicked and clicked. You wouldn't really get this scripted asset actions. And if you don't get this one, it's because you need that blueprint. So check my description for a link to that one. Thank you again. All right, now we can go into this. I'm just going to double click on this material and we're going to start to recreate it. I've got my content browser or a content drawer or whatever down here. So the first thing we're going to do is drag my Imphenzia PixPal base color texture into here, and then I'm going to grab the RGB node and just plug it into base color. And the UVs are correct there, it's UV 0. And remember what I said about the import settings now. If you're not getting the expected result, it could be because you've got compression on the texture, it could be because you're using MIP mapping, or you have the wrong filtering. It needs to be nearest filtering. So we're going to save this one and go back in here, and magically a lot of the stuff already working. Everything like the colors especially, we're not getting the proper emission here. It's getting a little bit this is a bit misleading because I didn't actually change the material on these two, but for everything else here, most of the stuff is starting to work. We're not getting quite the reflections that we were hoping for yet. For example, the toaster is looking pretty solid. We don't have any mirror reflections. We're not getting any reflections off the microwave, but color-wise, everything is working, but the emission and the metallics are not just yet. So let's go back into our material, and I'm going to be trying to tidy this up as I go as well. So I'm going to mark this and press C because we want to comment here, and I'm just going to put colors. That's the first thing we need to do. Second, I'm going to bring my Imphenzia PixPal emission texture into my material graph here. And we're going to start by just plugging the RGB value into the emissive color. And it's also using UV 0, that's correct. So I'm going to save this one. And we're going to go back here, and we can see that we're getting a little bit closer. Again, this is misleading because I didn't change that on, but we're getting emission on this. But it's not really lighting up, it's not blooming the way we were hoping for yet. The lights here it's emissive, but since we've got a well lit scene here, we're not really seeing it so much. So we need to pump up the value about this a little bit. Now we need to multiply the emission by something. So I'm going to right click here and search for constant. We could use a fixed value, but let's use a parameter instead. So I'm going to right click on it and just go convert to parameter, and let's call this one emission strength. We can set the min value to maybe 0 and the slider max value here to 100, and should set the default value. Let's put that on to 20. And now we need to drag from the RGB value here and search for multiply. And we're going to multiply the colors here of the emission read, and we're going to multiply that by our emission strength. And now we'll plug it into emissive color. We'll save this one and go back and have a look. And now we can see that the lights here are shining a little bit more. The computer lights here are blooming a little bit. We can test this. I'm going to double click on this one and bring down the material here, and let's switch it over to parameters. And now we can change this emission. We can see that the higher the value is, it's going to be blooming out a little bit more, and the lower it is, it's going to reduce that effect. But let's leave that one as 20 for now. And I'm going to go back into the material and we're going to group this to tidy it up. So block select those and press C, and it's called emission. Now let's deal with our metallic and roughness. So I'm going to bring our attributes texture in here, and luckily enough, the red value of this channel just plugs straight into metallic. So wherever there's red on the attribute texture, which is a little bit down here, it's combined with green, so it looks orange and yellow. But now red value controls metallic. And now we need to do roughness, which is the green channel. But this is actually smoothness, not roughness. So I'm gonna have to drag this one out and do 1 minus. So it takes the green value and takes 1 minus the green value and plug this one into roughness. And it's the same in Blender, it uses roughness too. And in Unity, it uses smoothness instead. So we can plug the green channel straight into there. But in this one, we need to negate it like this. So I'm gonna press save again and see, now we should have a little bit more of our reflectiveness back. If we go here, look at our toaster again. Yeah, it's reflecting the metal. We've got mirror, it's reflecting the environment, and everything else here that needs to be reflective is starting to do the reflective surfaces. The only thing that's not really working is the animation. This is still working because it's using the other material, but we would expect the keyboard here and the computer to be animating the lights. So let's do that one. I'm going to tidy this up. So I'll select these and press C, and let's name this one attributes. And now it's time to do the animated colors. So I'm going to right click here and let's search for texture coordinate. And we're going to take this one and we're going to break it out to 2 float components. And then I'm going to make a float 2 again. So this R value is just getting plugged straight across, but we need to do something for the animation if you remember. So I'm going to create a time node here. And I'm going to take the time value and multiply this one. And I'm actually going to be plugging it into there instead for tidiness. And we'll get the blue channel from the attributes texture and plug it into the multiplication node here. And now we're going to subtract here in between. I'm going to take the G value, the green value, which is the vertical or the Y value of the texture coordinate. And then we're going to subtract. And we're going to take away the time value. That's multiplied by the blue channel, and then plug this one back into the float 2. And now we've got a vector that we can plug into our UVs for the colors and plug it into the UVs for our emission. And we see here on the left now that this is working. If I don't do the multiplication with the blue, if you remember, if I do this, you can see that the entire texture is doing the animation. And we only want this right part. That's why we're grabbing the blue channel, multiplying time by the blue channel, and that way we can filter out, so it's only that region that's getting animated. And we can group these as well, mark them all, press C, and call this animated colors. And let's save it and go back here. And now we've got our RGB lights are working again. So everything is set up for this new material from scratch. So you might be wondering a little bit about the licensing now, and the Imphenzia PixPal textures and the material is Creative Commons 0, which is pretty much equivalent to public domain. So you can do whatever you want with it. You can create your own assets with it. You can create games with it. You can do freelancing and create assets for other people. You can even create assets and sell them on the asset store. You can modify the texture and create your own palette textures. You can do anything like that with it. However, all the other assets in this sample project, the showcase assets like this little jumping nurse here, the car, and all the furniture, that is not part of that license. And on my website, imphenzia.com, I actually have my own assets pack, and they're fairly cheaply priced. So if you need some characters, hundreds of them with some animations, or if you need a lot of furniture, head over to imphenzia.com and check out the assets section there. And you could either add them to your cart and buy them directly there. And for some of my patrons, they can actually download these assets pack as well as part of their tier rewards. So if you want to consider becoming a patron, that would help me out a great bunch as well, because it enables me to create these type of assets and it helps me create these type of videos too. So if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in another video again. Bye for now.